In 1206, Genghis Khan controlled nothing. 0 cities, 0 gold, 0 title, 0 title. He was a 44-year-old man who had been kidnapped as a child, sold into slavery, abandoned by his own tribe, and left to die on the frozen steppe of Central Asia. And within 25 years, he controlled more land than any human being in the history of this planet. Not just conquered, dominated, restructured, rebuilt in his own image. So here's the question that should be burning in your mind right now. What did he know that everyone else didn't? Because I'm going to tell you something that most history teachers, most documentaries, and most YouTube videos will never tell you. The Mongols were not powerful because they were violent. Lots of empires were violent. The Romans were violent. The Ottomans were violent. Every empire that ever existed was built on blood. Violence alone has never, not once in human history, built something lasting. What made the Mongols different was something far more dangerous than violence. It was their thinking, their systems, their psychology, and every single principle they operated on you can use today, in your career, in your relationships, in building whatever it is you're trying to build with your life. If that sounds like something worth your time, hit subscribe right now. I put everything into these videos and I don't want you to miss what's coming next. Now let's get into it. Let's start with the thing nobody wants to hear. Most people are weak not because they lack talent or resources. They're weak because they are comfortable. Comfort is the enemy of power, full stop. And the Mongols understood this at a biological level before the science existed to explain it. Every single Mongol warrior, from birth, was trained to suffer, not as punishment, as preparation. Children as young as 3 were put on horses, not ponies, full-grown war horses. They rode in freezing temperatures, slept on the ground, hunted for their own food, and were expected to handle pain without complaint. By the time a Mongol boy was a teenager, he had already experienced more physical adversity than most modern adults will face in their entire lives. And here is what that created: men who could not be broken by circumstances, because they had already been broken and rebuilt 100 times before the battle even started. Now apply that to your life right now. Seriously, be honest with yourself. When was the last time you did something genuinely hard? Not inconvenient, not uncomfortable, hard. When did you last push your body, your mind, your discipline, past the point where everything in you was screaming to stop? Because the Mongols didn't get powerful by reading about toughness. They got powerful by living it every single day before they needed it. The world rewards people who have already done the work before the opportunity arrives. And most people haven't. That gap between where you are and where you could be, that gap is your step. Cross it. Now here's something that will completely change how you think about intelligence and power. Genghis Khan was almost certainly illiterate. He couldn't read, he couldn't write. By every conventional standard of his era, he was uneducated. And yet he consistently outmaneuvered, and outstrategized some of the most formally educated rulers on earth. Persian scholars, Chinese emperors, European knights trained in the most sophisticated military doctrine of the time. How? Because Genghis Khan understood something that school systems to this day refuse to teach. Information is not the same as intelligence. Knowing things is not the same as being able to use things. He had a radical obsession with learning from every enemy he defeated. After every conquest, before any looting or celebrating, he would sit down with enemy commanders, engineers, scholars, and administrators, and ask them questions. How do you build your siege weapons? How do you organize your supply chains? How do you manage taxation across diverse populations? He absorbed the best systems from every civilization he touched and then weaponized them against the next one. The Persian Empire had the best engineers. He recruited them. The Chinese had gunpowder technology and advanced siege warfare. He absorbed it. The Silk Road merchants had communication networks. He took control of them and made them faster. This is not what conquerors did. Conquerors burned things. Genghis Khan collected knowledge like a weapon. And what this means for you is this: stop being loyal to your own ignorance. Stop defending the way you currently do things just because it's familiar. The most powerful move you can make in any area of your life is to find the person who is already getting the result you want. Study exactly how they're doing it, extract the system, and apply it. No ego, no pride, just ruthless learning. The Mongols built the largest empire in history, partly by being willing to say they do this better than us. Let's learn it. How many opportunities are you leaving on the table because you're too proud to admit someone else has a better way? Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the part that most people genuinely don't know. The Mongol army had no supply chains in the traditional sense. Every other army in history moved slow because they had to drag their food, their equipment, their infrastructure behind them. The Roman legions were powerful, but they needed roads, supply lines, and months of logistical preparation. The Mongols had almost none of that. Each warrior carried his own dried meat, his own bow, his own arrows, and rode multiple horses, sometimes 5 or 6, so he could switch mounts and never slow down. This made them the fastest military force on earth by a factor that was incomprehensible to their enemies. Persian commanders reported Mongol armies appearing on the horizon and attacking before scouts had time to return with a warning. They moved at speeds of up to 100 miles per day. That is not a typo. 100 miles per day in the 13th century, without motors, without roads, across terrain that would have stopped any other army cold. What does this teach you? Eliminate your dependencies. Every single thing in your life that you require in order to function, every comfort, every system, every person you lean on as a crutch, is also a leash. It limits how fast you can move, how bold you can act, how quickly you can respond to opportunity. The Mongols were fast because they traveled light. The most powerful people in the modern world, the ones who build things, disrupt industries, create movements, they share this quality. They don't need the perfect setup. They don't need permission. They don't need all the conditions to be right. They move with what they have, right now, today, and they figure out the rest on the way. What are you waiting for? What dependency is slowing you down? Cut it. Let's talk about loyalty, because the Mongols rewired the entire concept of it in a way that modern leaders still haven't fully figured out. In 13th century Asia, loyalty was almost entirely tribal. You were loyal to your blood, your clan, your ethnicity. That was it. That was the entire social architecture of this steppe, and it made large-scale cooperation basically impossible, because every tribe was always one insult away from betraying every alliance. Genghis Khan destroyed this system. He made loyalty personal and meritocratic. In his army, it didn't matter what tribe you came from, what language you spoke, or what your father's name was. What mattered was performance and commitment. His closest generals, the men he trusted with his life and his empire, were not all Mongols. Subutai, arguably the greatest military commander of the entire medieval period, came from a blacksmith family of a minor tribe. He rose to command armies of hundreds of thousands purely on the basis of ability. Gaib, another of his top generals, was a man who had shot Genghis Khan's horse in battle while fighting against him. Genghis Khan captured him, asked him directly about it, and when Gaib admitted it without flinching, Khan promoted him on the spot, because he valued honesty and courage more than obedience. Think about what you're doing with the people in your life. Are you surrounded by people who are actually capable, actually honest, actually pushing you forward? Or are you surrounded by people who are comfortable, familiar, and safe? Because familiarity and loyalty are not the same thing. The most dangerous people in your life are sometimes the ones you trust most by default, not by merit. And the most valuable allies you will ever have might be people you haven't even met yet, from backgrounds nothing like yours, who carry a skill or perspective you desperately need. Build your team on merit, not on comfort. Now I want to talk about fear, because the Mongols used it as a weapon more deliberately and more surgically than any force in history. And this is not about being cruel. This is about understanding human psychology at its deepest level. When the Mongols approached a new city, they would always send a message first: surrender now, and you will be spared. Your people will live, your culture will survive, your trade routes will be protected. Resist, and we will burn everything to the ground and leave nothing standing. And then, and this is the key, they followed through. Every single time, without exception. Cities that surrendered were indeed protected. Cities that resisted were indeed destroyed, and the stories of what happened were allowed to spread deliberately. This wasn't random violence. It was a calculated psychological campaign. By the time Mongol armies reached major cities, entire populations were making strategic decisions based on reputation alone. Some of the most fortified cities in Asia surrendered without a single arrow being fired, simply because they had heard what happened to those who didn't. The lesson here is not to threaten people. The lesson is about the power of follow-through. In your life, every time you say you're going to do something and don't do it, you are training everyone around you, including yourself, that your word means nothing. And once your word means nothing, your power evaporates. Credibility is everything. The Mongols understood that reputation is a force multiplier. It does work for you before you even arrive. What reputation are you building right now? When people hear your name, what do they expect? Do they expect someone who delivers, someone who follows through, someone whose yes actually means yes? Or are you someone people have learned to discount? Because that gap between what you say and what you do, that gap is where your power dies. Here's the final, and perhaps the most important thing the Mongols did that almost nobody talks about. They created the first true globalized communication and trade network in history. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, was a 150-year period during which the entire Silk Road from China to Eastern Europe was safe, regulated, and thriving. Merchants could travel from Beijing to Persia without fear of bandits or border conflicts. Information, technology, art, food, disease, religion, and ideas moved at a speed the world had never experienced. Many historians argue the Mongol network was the direct predecessor to the modern global economy. Genghis Khan understood something that most conquerors never did. Control of networks is more powerful than control of territory. If you own the roads, if you own the trade routes, if you own the communication systems, you don't need to physically occupy every city. Everything flows through you. Everything depends on you. You become structurally essential to everyone else's survival. Ask yourself, in your industry, in your social world, in your career, are you building territory or are you building networks? Territory can be taken from you. A network once built around you makes you indispensable. The most powerful people in the modern world are not the ones with the most resources. They're the ones at the center of the most connections. Build a network around your value. Become the node that everything passes through. Make yourself structurally essential, and power will come to you without you having to chase it. So here's what we've actually learned today. Not history trivia, real principles. The Mongols were powerful because they intentionally built themselves for adversity before adversity arrived, because they learned without ego from anyone who had something to teach them, because they traveled light and moved fast and eliminated every dependency that wasn't essential, because they built loyalty on merit rather than comfort, because they made their word iron every single time, without exception, because they understood that owning networks is more powerful than owning territory. These are not ancient ideas. These are timeless principles operating in the world right now, in every powerful person, every dominant company, every movement that actually changes things. The only question is whether you're going to use them or keep watching other people do it. History doesn't remember the people who had the best intentions. It doesn't remember the people who almost did something great. It remembers the people who moved, the people who built, the people who, when the world said you can't, they went anyway. Genghis Khan started with nothing. What's your excuse? If this video added real value to your life, the single best thing you can do is hit like and subscribe right now. It costs you nothing and it means everything for this channel to keep making content like this. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.